The gleaming halls of the Galactic Academy stood tall against the purple sky of New Capital. Inside classroom, A113, 20 alien students waited for their new teacher. Some had tentacles, others had scales, and a few glowed with natural light. They were the best and brightest of their worlds, sent to learn about military history. The door slid open with a soft hiss. A human walked in, wearing a simple black uniform with gold buttons. He wasn't very tall or strong-looking. Some students whispered to each other, wondering if this was really their teacher. "Good morning, class. I am Professor Reed from Earth," he said, writing his name on the floating screen behind him. "I will teach you about the history of combat on my home planet." A student with blue crystal skin raised his hand. "Teacher, why should we learn about Earth? Your people only joined the Federation 10 years ago. You barely have spaceships." Professor Reed smiled. He had heard this many times before. "That's a good question. Tell me, how old is your civilization?" "We have records going back 50,000 years, the crystal student said proudly. "And in those 50,000 years, how many wars has your people fought?" The student thought for a moment. 3 major conflicts. "We are a peaceful species." Professor Reed nodded and turned to the class. "Earth has seen over 15,000 wars in just the last 5,000 years. We fought on land, in the sea, in the air, and now in space. We've used everything from sticks and stones to nuclear weapons." The room grew quiet. A student with 6 eyes blinked all of them at once. "That's impossible. No species could survive so much fighting." "Not only did we survive," Professor Reed said, "we got better at it. Each war taught us something new. About strategy, about technology, about ourselves." He walked between the rows of desks, looking at each student. "The Federation didn't invite Earth to join because we're advanced. They invited us because we know how to fight and survive against impossible odds." A student with green fur raised a tentacle. "But Professor, we learn about peaceful ways to solve problems. Why would anyone choose violence?" Professor Reed pulled up an image on the screen. It showed ancient humans fighting a cave bear with spears. "We didn't always choose violence. Sometimes it chose us. Earth has dangerous animals, harsh weather, and limited resources. We had to fight to survive from our very first days." The students looked at the image with new interest. Even the crystal student leaned forward to see better. "In this class, you'll learn why humans think differently about combat. You'll see how we turned our weaknesses into strengths. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand why the Federation's military leaders say that one human soldier is worth 100 from other species." Professor Reed looked at his watch. "For our first lesson, we'll go back to the very beginning. To a time when humans were not the strongest, fastest, or smartest creatures on Earth. But we had something special. We could learn, adapt, and work together." He dimmed the lights and showed a new image. A group of early humans taking down a mammoth. "This is where our story begins, not with fancy weapons or advanced technology, but with bare hands, sharp sticks, and the will to survive." The class sat in silence, all eyes fixed on the screen. They had come expecting to learn about a primitive species. Instead, they were about to discover why humans had earned their place among the stars. Professor Reed walked into the classroom carrying an old wooden box. The alien students watched as he placed it on his desk and opened it carefully. Inside were stone tools, bronze daggers, and iron arrowheads. "These are not copies," he said, lifting a bronze sword. "These are real weapons from Earth's past. Each one tells a story of survival." The crystal student looked confused. "But they're so simple. Just shaped metal and stone." "Simple?" Professor Reed picked up a stone axe. "This design took thousands of years to perfect. Every curve, every edge was tested in battle." He passed the axe to the nearest student, who nearly dropped it. "It's so heavy," said the student with 6 eyes, passing it to others. "How could humans fight with this?" "That's what made us different," Reed explained. "We weren't born strong enough to fight with these. So we trained. We built muscle. We practiced until our hands bled. He showed them old cave paintings of warriors training. A student with tentacles raised one to ask a question. But why not wait for better technology? We couldn't wait. While other species evolved natural weapons, claws, fangs, poison, humans had to make their own. And we had to make them fast. Reed pulled up images of ancient battles. Look at these formations, the phalanx, the shield wall. Humans learned to fight as one unit, turning our small numbers into strength. The class watched videos of historical reenactments. They saw Roman legions marching in perfect order, medieval knights charging on horseback, samurai engaging in sword duels. With each scene, the alien students grew more uncomfortable. "You hurt your own kind this much?" asked the green-furred student. "Just to learn fighting." Reed nodded slowly. Every battle taught us something new. The losers learned what didn't work. The winners learned what did. And both sides got stronger. He showed them siege weapons next, catapults, trebuchets, battering rams. We learned to break any wall, cross any river, climb any mountain. If we couldn't go through an obstacle, we went around it. If we couldn't go around, we went over. There was always a way. A quiet student in the back, who had scales like armor, finally spoke. "My people never made weapons like these. We focused on defense, hiding in our shells until danger passed." "That's a valid strategy," Reed agreed. "But humans couldn't hide. We had to face our threats head-on. And something interesting happened. The more we fought, the better we got at staying alive." He put the ancient weapons away and showed them one last image. A modern human city. "Look at this. Despite thousands of years of warfare, we built this. We survived. We thrived. Because every battle, every war, taught us not just how to fight, but how to protect what matters." The bell rang, but no one moved. They were all still staring at the city image, trying to understand how a species could face so much violence and still create something beautiful. "Next class," Reed said quietly, "we'll talk about what happened when humans discovered gunpowder." That's when things really got interesting. The students left in silence, each carrying a piece of Bronze Age warfare in their minds. They had come to learn about combat, but they were learning about determination instead. The next class began with a bang. Professor Reed had set up a small device that made a loud noise and shot out sparks. Several alien students jumped in their seats. The crystal student's surface crackled with nervous energy. "That was just a small firecracker," Reed explained. "Now imagine something 1,000 times stronger." He showed them a video of an old cannon firing. The boom echoed through the classroom's perfect acoustics. This is what happened when humans discovered they could make powder explode. A student with glowing spots raised a hand. "Our people discovered space travel before we thought about using explosions as weapons. Why didn't humans do the same?" "Because we didn't have that choice," Reed answered. He pulled up a timeline on the screen. "Look how fast human weapons changed after gunpowder. From simple tubes that shot metal balls to rifles that could hit targets a mile away. All in just a few hundred years." The six-eyed student tapped nervously on the desk. "But that means anyone could kill from far away, even without training or strength." "Exactly," Reed said. "It changed everything. Warriors who spent years mastering swords had to learn new skills. Castles that stood for centuries fell in days. The weak could fight the strong. The few could fight the many." He showed them how guns evolved. Muskets became rifles. Single shots became rapid fire. The alien students watched in silence as the weapons got smaller, faster, and more deadly. "Our scientists calculated that humans shouldn't have survived this period," said the scaled student. "The death rate should have been too high." Reed nodded. "Many thought we wouldn't survive. But something unexpected happened. As weapons got deadlier, humans got smarter about using them. We developed better armor, better tactics, better ways to heal wounds. We learned to dig trenches, use cover, move in ways that made us harder to hit. The green-furred student curled their tentacles tight. It sounds horrible. Living in fear of invisible death from far away. It was horrible. Reed agreed. But it taught us to think differently about combat. Look at this. He showed them a modern battlefield simulation. See how human soldiers move. Always in cover, always watching all angles, always working as a team. That didn't come from training manuals. It came from thousands of years of learning the hard way. A quiet student in the back finally spoke up. Is that why humans are so good at space combat now? Because you learn to fight without seeing your enemy? Partly, Reed said. But there's more to it. When humans moved into space, we brought everything we learned with us. Every trick, every tactic, every hard lesson. He paused, letting that sink in. Other species had to learn space combat from scratch. We just had to adapt what we already knew. The bell rang, but this time no one moved. They were all thinking about what they'd seen, about how a species could take something as destructive as gunpowder and turn it into a step toward the stars. Next time, Reed said softly, we'll talk about what happened when humans learned to split atoms. That's when we truly understood the price of power. Professor Reed started the class by dimming the lights. The screen showed an old black and white film of massive armies moving across land, sea, and air. Tanks rolled through cities, ships battled on vast oceans, and planes filled the skies. This was modern warfare, he said, when humans learned to fight with machines. He zoomed in on a tank crushing through a wall. One of these could do more damage than 1,000 ancient warriors. The crystal student's surface flickered with concern. How many fought in these wars? Hundreds of millions, Reed answered. Entire nations joined the fight. Factories worked day and night making weapons. Scientists created new ways to kill. Everyone had a role. The tentacled student trembled slightly. But that's not combat anymore. That's extinction. We came close, Reed admitted, but something important happened. Humans learned that bigger wasn't always better. He showed them images of small groups fighting in jungles and cities. While armies fought with tanks and planes, others found different ways to win. The six-eyed student leaned forward. They look like they're hiding, fighting from shadows. We call it guerrilla warfare, Reed explained. Small groups fighting bigger forces by being clever, hitting weak spots, disappearing before the enemy could respond. He smiled slightly. Humans got very good at being annoying. A student who looked like living metal spoke up. My people would never fight like that. It seems dishonest. War isn't about being fair, Reed said. It's about surviving. And humans learn to survive against impossible odds. He showed them more videos. Soldiers crawling through mud, swimming through rivers at night, hiding in plain sight. The scaled student watched closely. They're adapting. Like animals. Better than animals, Reed corrected. We learn to think in new ways, to use the enemy's strength against them, to turn their advantages into weaknesses. He played a recording of an old radio broadcast. We also learned about fighting with words and ideas, making the enemy lose hope, making our people stay strong. Sometimes the most important battles happened in minds, not on battlefields. The students watched as images showed how modern warfare changed everything it touched. Cities were destroyed and rebuilt. Borders were erased and redrawn. Old empires fell and new powers rose. The most important lesson from this era wasn't about weapons or tactics, Reed said quietly. It was about will. The desire to keep fighting, keep surviving, no matter what. He looked at each student in turn. That's what makes humans dangerous. Not our guns or bombs or tanks, but our refusal to give up. The bell rang through the silent room. As the students gathered their things, many looked troubled. They had seen how a primitive species had turned warfare into an art, and they were starting to understand why the Federation's older members were so nervous about their new human allies. Professor Reed started class by showing a single image, a mushroom cloud rising into the sky. The alien students stared in silence. Even those without traditional faces showed signs of shock. "This is what happened when humans learned to split atoms," Reed said quietly. "We built weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds, weapons that could poison the land for generations, weapons that could end all life on Earth." The crystal student's surface had gone completely dull. Why would anyone build such things? "Fear," Reed answered. "Fear that others would build them first. Fear that made nations spend fortunes on weapons they hoped never to use." He showed them maps of missile ranges, submarine paths, bomber routes. "We called it the Cold War because the big powers never fought directly. They were too afraid of what would happen." The tentacled student had wrapped all appendages tightly around itself. "How did you survive? How did your world not burn?" "Because of something called MADE, mutually assured destruction." Reed drew a simple diagram. If one side launched their weapons, the other would launch too. Everyone would die. So nobody launched. The six-eyed student blinked rapidly. "That's insane. Protecting peace by threatening total war." It was insane, Reed agreed. But it worked. The fear of nuclear war was so strong that nations found other ways to compete. They fought smaller wars far from home. They battled with money and culture instead of bombs. The scaled student raised a hand. "Our historians say humans weren't ready for nuclear power, that you got it too soon." "Maybe they're right," Reed said. "But facing that power changed us, made us understand what real destruction meant." He showed them images of peace protests, disarmament talks, scientists working to use nuclear power for good. The living metal student spoke up. "In our world, weapons are for defense only, never for threats. We learned that lesson the hard way," Reed replied. "Today, Earth's nuclear weapons are controlled by strict rules. But we keep them, because somewhere in human DNA is the memory of looking into the atomic abyss, of knowing we could end everything with the push of a button." He switched to a final image, a peaceful Earth seen from space. "The nuclear age taught us our most important lesson yet, that some weapons are too terrible to use. That victory means nothing if your world dies. That sometimes the bravest thing is choosing not to fight." The bell rang, but nobody moved. They were all still staring at Earth, trying to understand a species that could create world-ending weapons and then choose to live with them, day after day, year after year, never giving in to the temptation to use them. Professor Reed turned on a hologram showing human ships moving through space in complex patterns. The alien students watched as the vessels twisted and turned, using asteroids and planetary bodies for cover. "When humans reached space, everyone expected us to forget our old ways of fighting," Reed said. "They thought we would copy other species' tactics. Instead, we looked to our past." The crystal student pointed at a ship diving behind a moon. "That's like the submarines you showed us." "Exactly," Reed smiled. "Space is just another ocean. Our ships hide in sensor shadows like submarines underwater. They move in formations copied from ancient navies." The hologram showed human vessels surrounding an enemy ship. "This is the same circle our ancestors used to trap mammoths." The scaled student watched intently. "You turned space into a hunting ground." "We turned it into every kind of battlefield we know," Reed corrected. He showed more examples. Ships using mining lasers like old artillery. Fighters swooping past capital ships like cavalry charging infantry. Small craft protecting larger ones like medieval shield walls. The six-eyed student raised several hands. "But space is different. There's no up or down, no ground to hold. That's what makes it perfect," Reed replied. "Every tactic we learned on Earth works in space if you think about it right. Guerrilla fighters hitting supply lines. We do that to enemy fuel ships. Ancient armies controlling mountain passes. We do that with stable jump points." The living metal student shifted uncomfortably. "The Federation said humans would need years to learn space combat." "They thought we would start from zero," Reed said. "But we started with thousands of years of combat experience. We just had to translate it." He showed them training simulations where human crews practiced space battles based on historical fights. The tentacled student watched a human ship use a star's gravity to slingshot past enemy fire, like the stone throwers you showed us, using natural force as a weapon. Nature is nature, whether on Earth or in space. Reed nodded. Gravity is gravity. Cover is cover. The basics of combat don't change just because the battlefield gets bigger. He switched the hologram to show the Federation's combined fleet. Human ships mixed with alien vessels in new formations that used the best of both styles. The Federation feared we would be too primitive for space warfare, Reed said softly. Instead, we showed them how primitive wisdom could improve their modern tactics. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The bell rang, and for the first time, the students seemed reluctant to leave. They had come to learn about human combat in space. Instead, they learned that humans had never stopped being the clever apes who hunted mammoths with sticks and stones. They had just found bigger mammoths. The emergency sirens started during Professor Reed's final class. Red lights flashed across the academy's halls. A voice boomed through every speaker. Unknown hostile fleet detected. All students report to shelter zones. Reed didn't move. Neither did his students. On the main screen, they watched as enemy ships appeared at the edge of Federation space. The crystal student's surface pulsed with fear. Those are deep space raiders. No one has ever stopped their attacks. Computer, show Federation Defense Fleet, Reed ordered. The screen split, showing human and alien ships moving to intercept. The professor smiled slightly. Watch carefully. This is your final exam. The six-eyed student pointed at the human ships. They're not following standard defense protocols. No, Reed agreed. They're following something much older. The human ships split into smaller groups, each taking position behind different moons and asteroids, like hunters surrounding prey. The raiders attacked first, their superior ships charging straight at the Federation's defense line. But the human ships didn't engage. They waited, hidden, patient. Just like the ancient armies, the scaled student whispered, letting the enemy choose the ground. The raiders' formation broke against the Federation's front line. As they scattered, looking for weak points, the hidden human ships struck. They emerged from their cover in perfect coordination, their tactics turning space itself into a weapon. Those movements, the living metal student said, they're like the old naval battles you showed us. Reed nodded. 3,000 years ago, Greek ships trapped the Persian fleet in a narrow bay. Today, we're using asteroids instead of coastlines, but the principle is the same. The students watched in awe as human ships performed maneuvers from every era of combat. Small fighters harassed the raiders like ancient skirmishers. Larger ships provided covering fire like World War II destroyers protecting carriers. Every lesson Reed had taught them was playing out in real time. They're winning, the tentacled student realized. The raiders are actually retreating. Not retreating, Reed corrected. Being herded. Look where our ships are pushing them. The screen showed the raiders' only escape route, straight toward a massive gas giant's gravity well. The crystal student's surface brightened with understanding, like driving mammoth herds off cliffs. They watched as the raiders realized their mistake too late. The gas giant's gravity disrupted their engines, leaving them helpless. The battle was over in minutes. As the all-clear sirens sounded, Professor Reed looked at his stunned students. This is why the Federation wanted humans as allies. Not because we're strongest or most advanced, but because we remember. Every battle, every war, every hard lesson learned. We carry them with us to the stars. The students stood in silence, finally understanding. They had come to learn about human combat history. Instead, they had witnessed its living legacy. And somewhere in the depths of space, the raiders had learned what so many others had learned before, that humans were not just another species with weapons. They were the end result of countless battles, the survivors of endless wars, the inheritors of every combat lesson Earth had to teach. Class dismissed, Reed said softly, but none of his students moved. They kept watching the screen, seeing human history written in the stars.